Okay, I'm back. Twisted Confessions, by Bryan Bloom, Chapter 11, Thursday, November 10th, 2022, 7 a.m. The hard chair and unheated old church room went unnoticed to Aaron Siebowitz, aka Sibo. He was too busy being in awe, too consumed by what he still continued to learn in the Financial Truth Club. In front of him, Professor Edmonton, his newfound mentor, stood preaching about yet another lesson that went against the traditional ways Sibo and his classmates were taught. He felt his stomach twist in a knot, similar to the way it did when he was told that Santa Claus wasn't real. Like the world of a traditional finance, the holiday season brought with it a fake jolly man that promised to bring presents, that your dreams would come true if you believed in him. While it was a lovely time of year and brought with it great memories, it was gut wrenching when Sibo discovered that the big guy didn't magically ride his sleigh down from the North Pole to deliver gifts, much like how he felt about finance today. Those young Santa believing children got older and grew perceptive to the differences between reality and fantasy. As far as SIBO was concerned, the traditional way of teaching was like the Santa Claus of academics. At least that was how Professor Edmonton described mainstream finance when he invited him to join the Financial Truth Club several months ago. At first, Sibo had been hesitant when his English professor brought the topic up. It all started when Sibo was hurrying to get a timed essay written in the class one day when his elbow accidentally knocked the latest Terry Tyson book he had been reading onto the floor. He'll never forget the look on the professor's face when he bent down to pick it up after taking three long strides to where he was seated. His eyes transformed into two slits as one massive hand held the book out in front of him, his gaze scanning the interior like a typewriter moving across a fresh page. Professor Edmonton had been a passionate guy, one who often used his entire body when he was recite when he theatrically recited Shakespeare scenes. His love of the written word served as a rippling effect, and a decent amount of his students transitioned from other majors into English simply because of his infectious passion for the subject. And while he was intense while teaching, Sibo had never seen a lace of anger in his eyes until he held that Terry Tyson book out like it was contagious. After that class that day, Professor Edmonton, who he now called Dwyer, stopped him. Take a seat, Aaron. He rumpled his eyebrows together as he sat on the edge of his desk, his long legs extending out and crossing at the ankles. They call you Sibo, don't they? Yeah. Confusion set in as Sibo placed his palm on the top of his head and pulled and twisted his hair, his go to nervous reaction. This couldn't possibly be about grades. He was excelling in every single class. He had been in it had been in his nature to never settle for less than the best in all aspects of life. It was why he was a black belt in karate, winning every martial arts match he had ever participated in. It was why he was always stressed, gripped by the pressure that he put on himself, the pressure that his own father had placed on him growing up, and what he still felt today as a 21-year-old college student. How's that book? Dwyer inquired casually as he crossed his arms. What book? That book with the guy who preaches about finance, Dwyer said, nonchalance lacing his voice, a beefy hand outstretched, motioning toward Sibo's bag. Something was off in the way Dwyer's words came out. He had been a man who spoke eloquently and seldom stumbled or referred to authors as guys. As if on command, Siebel pulled the hardcover book out of his bag, holding it out to Dwyer. This book? Dwyer waved him off. Oh, I don't need to read it. I already know everything it says. You've read it? Nah, I don't really need to. Another nervous gesture. Sibo pulled and twisted his hair, feeling the greasy pomade between his fingers. Oh, okay. If this hadn't been his last class of the day, and if it wasn't mildly curious about Dwyer's current demeanor, he would have been out the door like a long time ago. You're probably wondering why I kept you after class. You could say that. Sibo raised his eyebrows, leaned forward with the book nestled between his elbows, asserting himself as much as he could in front of the intimidating man. That book you're reading, how do you feel about it? What is this, a therapy session? Sibo felt himself starting to get aggravated. I love it. I mean, this guy is a genius. If I keep following his advice, I'll be rich in no time. Sibo knew that he was speaking to Dwyer, but he hoped that his own father had been on the receiving end of this response, and for that matter, his accomplishments. Maybe one day his dad would see that he did turn out good and that all his hard work had paid off. Maybe he'd stop berating him and show some appreciation for the responsible man he had turned into. Bet a lot of kids in your generation feel that way. Pretty much. I think this book hit the bestseller list the first day it was live, and it's remained there for weeks. Sibo gripped the book with both hands and leaned back in his chair. He could feel his passion for the topic of money start to sizzle within. Since he'd been a fan of Terry Tyson, he had found himself in several animated conversations about implementing the guru's advice. Ah, but have you ever really done the math? What math? Sibo was confused, and the wrinkle on his brow must have been obvious, because Dwyer continued. I understand why you love Terry Tyson. I mean, heck, Terry's advice is very similar to what is taught within the halls of this very university. Okay. Sibo thought about the similarities in what he learned from Terry's books, podcasts, and interviews, and compared it to what he had learned in Professor Ross Jackson's class. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Just hear me out for a second, okay? Dwyer emerged from his desk and stood front and center facing the whiteboard. Down the left side of the board, he wrote three numbers: 20 trillion, 30 trillion, and 33% before turning to Sibo. The national debt just 7 years ago was about 20 trillion, and today it's just past 30 trillion. He divulged the tidbit of information, following it up with a 33% increase, right? Before Sibo could answer, Dwyer shouted out, wrong, as he crossed out the number 33. Sibo leaned forward in his chair, gently placing the book face up on his desk. His eager student expression made its way to his face. With a crinkled brow and a cocked head, he said, wait, that's simple fractions. 20 over 30 is 2/3, which means the increase was 1/3. That means that it's a 33% increase. Ah, that is what our simple minds want to believe. But when you calculate a percent increase, you have to first calculate the increase. Dwyer turned his back to Sibo and plucked a red marker from the bottom ledge of the whiteboard. Under the 20 trillion number, he drew a line, and under the line, he added the number 10 trillion. To the right, he added the description dollar increase. To calculate a percent increase, you always divide the increase by the value before the increase. He wrote the equation out, piercing the air with the shrill squeaks of marker gliding across the porcelain surface. 10 trillion over 20 trillion. Dwyer turned back and maintained a penetrating stare at Sibo, as if he was enjoying the enlightenment that was happening in real time. Sibo shifted uneasily in his seat as he did the math. That's 50%. Yes, it is. You, my friend, know your math. Dwyer dropped the marker back onto the ledge, took two long strides, and leaned on the front of his desk. With arms crossed over his chest, right angle over left, it is still a $10 trillion increase. But when you do the math right, you realize the increase is worse than you thought. 50% is a lot worse than 33%, isn't it? Yeah, Sibo's jaw went slack. His eyes widened as the numbers lined up in his head. And just as he was about to ask why, Dwyer continued. They don't want you to see it that way. Let's use a real life scenario as it happens a few years ago here in Illinois when they raised our state income taxes from 3% to 5%. They were clever in how they worded it, so we didn't think it was that much of an increase. Sibo nodded, readying himself for another lesson. They told us that it was just an increase of 2%. Dwyer said as he moved back to the whiteboard and wrote 3%, 5%, 100,000, 3,000, and 5,000. He connected the 3% and the 5% with lines that looked like an arrow pointing to the right and wrote 2%. A 2% increase, right? He turned towards Sibo. Then, just as a magician would, start moving objects around. Next to the 100,000, he moved the 3% to the right of it and added an equal sign and moved the 3,000 after the equal sign. Well, if you've earned 100,000 the year before the increase, your income taxes were 3,000. Then he duplicated the equation. But just as in Disappearing Act, he changed the 3 to the 5% and added 5,000 to the right of the new equal sign. So just raising the tax rate 2% meant that the next year that the same $100,000 would have resulted in a tax bill of 5,000. Does that sound like a 2% rise in taxes to you? To Sibo, it all seemed sleight of hand magic act, but it wasn't. The math was right there in front of him. Dwyer didn't need to write anything else on the board. Sibo took in a deep breath, inhaling the earth-shattering information that really wasn't that earth-shattering at all. It was simple math. He ran the numbers in his head and answered, that's certainly not 2%. That's a 67% increase. Dwyer switched his stance and dropped another bomb that Sibo had thought was true. Now, I'm sure that book also tells you to put as much money into your IRA and 401k as you can, right? Sibo nodded affirmatively. Let's test that with some math. He spoke slowly, allowing all the new information to seep into Sibo's brain. Back to the whiteboard, Dwyer wrote 100,000, 25% right underneath it, $100,000 and 25% right below it, and then 25,000 down the left side, right underneath the 25%. If you were in the 25% bracket when you put the money into the IRA and you invested $100,000 over the years, that means that you would have deferred $25,000 of taxes. As he added an X before the 25% and a line under it, deferred to when? He asked no one in particular and followed it up with a parade of more questions. When you take it out, maybe 20 to 30 years from now, what will your tax rate be at that time? Now, down the middle of the whiteboard, he wrote the same 30 trillion from before. And then below it, added the number 4, and below that, 52 trillion with a red marker. Did you know that in just 4 years, our national debt is projected to be over 52 trillion? You don't even have to do the math. Just use common sense. Sibo recognized the coloring of Dwyer's face transforming into an angry red. That was growing to the same intensity as the red 52 trillion on the board, and felt a similar heated sensation coming to the surface of his own face. If our debt went from 20 trillion to 30 trillion in 7 years and is rising to 52 trillion in just another 4, do you think our government is going to need more or less money in the future? More, Sibo blurted out the simple answer. And that book tells you to defer the payment of taxes today to some uncertain date at some uncertain rate. Here's a tip. If you substitute the word postponed for the word deferred, which sounds worse? Postponed always sounded worse. It was the delay of events, the late start to things, and it always happened as a result of things not going to plan. Yes, deferred sounded a lot better in Sibo's mind. I wonder why they used the word deferred. Dwyer's lips leaked with sarcasm. Better yet, substitute it with the word debt and think of what that means. To enter into an undeniable obligation with the government, who has the power to decide the retroactive interest rate in the form of future tax rate and push it back to today. At the same time, the lender, the IRS, demands the money you haven't paid yet. Dwyer paused, letting Sibo ingest the words. In what direction did you just say you thought tax rates would go? I wonder why that book doesn't describe it this way, because in all reality, a deferred tax is nothing more than a debt. And the author of that book says that all debt is bad. Yet he encourages you to add to that debt every day you go to work over a 30 to 35-year period of time. If you follow that advice, you will be in debt up to your ears, not even knowing how much you owe. Instead of being debt-free in time for retirement, quite the contrary to how they show those peaceful retired couples enjoying their beach vacations on billboards across the nation, huh? That's incredibly insane. The words didn't justify what Sibo was feeling about his new knowledge. He looked down at the book, taking in Terry Tyson's smile. It used to feel genuine and glowing, laced in goodwill, and suddenly it looked like a smirk. Now it looked like a set of fake glowing teeth pulled up into a cocky grin. It didn't take long for the shame to kick in, tackling Sibo's ego. All the times he touted the author's words, pressing others to consider taking financially sound steps that Tyson swore by. Let's do some more math. Back to the whiteboard. Now Dwyer wrote $100,000 right below it, 25%, and below that, $25,000 down the left side. Then an arrow pointing from the 100,000 to the 300,000 you just wrote in the middle. Assume that tax rates don't rise in the future, and your IRA grows from $100,000 to $300,000 without you adding any more to it. Remember, you didn't pay $25,000 of taxes when you put the 100,000 in. When you take the money out and taxes don't go up, he he adds 25% below the 300,000. You owe the IRS what you didn't pay, 25,000. He draws another arrow from the 25,000 on the left and adds 25,000 to the middle column. Right? Wrong. If taxes don't go up, you will owe taxes on the entire sum of the 300,000 at 25%, which amounts to 75,000. Dwyer lifted his brow, crossed out the 25,000 in the middle column, and instead wrote 75,000 in red. It's all very simple math. Now, on what amount of money are your investment fees based on? The 225,000 that is your money after you pay the 75,000 tax, or on the 300,000? Of course, the $300,000. Dwyer threw his arms into the air before he tossed out another question. Are you okay with paying the investment fees for the government's share of your money? Sibo inhaled, closing his eyes as the easy math equations danced in his head. He let out a breath. It had only been 10 minutes since Dwyer had been marking up the board. 15 minutes since he had first suggested he take a seat. Yet it felt like he had learned a lifetime of information. He forced himself to lift his lower jaw and seal his mouth shut. His head spun with numbers, a collision of equations aligning in his mind as he tried to fathom everything that he was just presented with. Are you saying I've been looking at money wrong this entire time? You and the majority of the population, but I won't hold it against you, Dwyer said, a smile tugging on the outside of his lips. He was back to his normal self. I don't understand, though. Why, how, when did... Sibo tried to organize a sentence in his head, but every thought came to an abrupt stop as another one rose to the surface. Let it all sink in. It might take some time. I know it did for me. Sibo looked down at the book. A sick feeling circulated in his stomach as he took in Terry Tyson's expression. His quintessential green tie and overly white teeth that screamed money. So I was wrong all along? He directed his question to Dwyer while maintaining eye contact with the alleged money-saving guru. No, he was wrong all along, as is all those who live by the traditional way of approaching finance. The wheels turned into Sibo's head right before his thoughts formed one straight line. So does that mean that the professors who teach at this school are... It's not just this school, my friend, it's every school in the country. It's not necessarily your professor's fault either. He interlaced his hands, rested them across his lap after he sunk down in his chair. It's just the way we've always been taught. People don't want to change. They get set in their ways, and well, what they don't know may be more important than what they do know. So if you thought something was true and that turned out not to be true, when would you want to know? Right away, Sibo paused. So how did you come to these practical conclusions? Well, let's just say I have a past. Behind his black rimmed glasses, Sibo could see a vulnerable side to the professor. You might think of it as the school of hard knocks. It was quite literally just that. When I was in college, I played hockey and ran with a crowd that didn't necessarily quote Shakespeare. Hockey is fun and all, but you get pushed and shoved and knocked down. For me, it was both physically and psychologically. Dwyer smiled. Not only did those guys check me into the boards, they boxed me into a proverbial corner and challenged me about how money really works. That's when I realized there is more to what the textbooks are telling us. Wait, so the textbooks are lying? Sibo asked, betrayal laced in his voice. Well, they're not lying. They're just not telling the whole truth. I suppose. You ever hear the saying about there being more than one way to skin a cat? Yeah. Well, why doesn't our finance department know all this? Have you ever brought it up to the dean? I have. In fact, I had some great conversations with Professor Jackson too, and even he started to weave some of the practical applications into the textbook theories in his classes. Dwyer squinted, his eyes together, thinking, actually, I think this is what earned him the Professor of the Year award a few years ago. He paused. But then it was strange. He stopped teaching the real world practical stuff and went back to the textbook content. It's kind of fizzled out like a bad trend through the entire finance department. And that was the moment that Dwyer invited Sibo to join the Financial Truth Club, a group of people who were determined to get the word out about the practical ways of finance, the ways that should be taught and lived by. Sibo looked around, taking in the club members he had grown to know and respect, and the financial rebels who were willing to create waves to make things right. Like Sibo and Dwyer, these individuals had made it their mission to get the truth out. Becky and Tim White sat beside each other, hand in hand in the front row, committed to breaking the cycle of the traditional ways of saving so that future generations could gain from it. Jessie Drury, a single mom of three, sat with her hands in her lap, her eyes focused on Dwyer's voice, taking in the practical example he was referring to. Billy Donahue, small business owner, sat upright, his head tilted to the side in deep thought. The Lyman siblings, Emmy and Ellie, who had discovered just how dangerous it can be to utilize only traditional ways of saving. This was all revealed to them when their parents were struggling in retirement. After putting in all those years, their savings towards a traditional 401k, with any hope they'd be able to help their mom and dad fix their situation and straighten out all the misconceptions that had been taught alongside all their fellow baby boomers. So that's the end of the reading for today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this is a murder mystery. This isn't just Bryan Bloom trying to read into his profession and to tout his books. He's trying to tell a story in a different way. And he is referring to this guru, this finance guru that was on the front cover of Sibo's book. That is a guy named Dave Ramsey that has the money makeover and the 7 baby steps that he's been touting for years. I think this book makes such a great point about the fact that those taxes, those deferred taxes, are going to be a tax basically. And that tax is well, of course it's a tax, but it's a debt because you're going to owe it. You aren't going to be able to, it's almost like a ransom. You're not going to be able to get your money out without giving the government some of your earnings or your savings. And if it does grow, you're going to pay all the fees along the way throughout those 30, 35 years that he uses as an example. And the government's still going to take whatever they decide they want when it comes time for you to distribute some of the money for your cash flow, for your income. And I think that's really what he was trying to get at some of the simple math. Yes, our national debt, I think, is, it's over 35 trillion. So it didn't go to 52 trillion in 4 years, but it is definitely climbing. And, anytime soon that could happen. When we are lowering the Fed funds rate, we are taking a big chance of increasing the inflation again, potentially reaching hyperinflation where things get out of control. And you can only imagine when we have that debt, where are they going to get the money? One of the places is they come to the people. And of course, they sell everybody on the idea that, hey, this is for the greater good. We have to do this. And they'll use some event, whether, it be COVID or something like it, or World War, or they're going to come up with a reason, not the real reason, which is that this monetary system is broken, and they've been kicking the can down the road, and it leaks every time you patch it. It leaks again, and it could be a geyser the next time. So thanks for listening, and I'll continue to read on. We're getting close to halfway through the book, and thanks again. Have a great day. Oh, and before I go, please look in the show notes. If you'd like to talk, you can jump on my calendar, see if there's a time that matches up with your schedule, and we can have a discussion about what you're hearing, what you're learning, and we can talk about your particular situation and see how I can help. All right. Thanks. Take care.